The cold had teeth that night, and Connor Owens felt every bite as he guided his horse through the Colorado mountain pass, just outside Cripple Creek, in the bitter February of 1881. He had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing through a late winter storm that seemed determined to freeze every living thing in its path. His supplies were running low, his water nearly frozen solid in his canteen, and the wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal. Connor pulled his coat tighter around himself, though it did little good against the penetrating cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. He was a tall man of 24 years, broad-shouldered and weathered from years of working cattle drives and odd jobs across the frontier. His dark hair hung past his collar, and his blue eyes were sharp despite his exhaustion. The moon hung full and bright above the snow-covered landscape, casting everything in an eerie silver glow. Connor had left Cripple Creek 2 weeks ago to deliver a message to a mining outfit 30 miles north, and the journey back had turned treacherous when the storm rolled in. Now he was just trying to survive the night and make it back to town before his fingers and toes surrendered to the frostbite he could already feel creeping in. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a shadow, a trick of the moonlight on the snow. But as his horse drew closer, he realized it was a woman, huddled against a large boulder beside the trail. She was shaking so violently that he could see it from several feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her buckskin dress offering little protection against the brutal cold. Her long black hair whipped around her face in the wind, and even from a distance, Connor could see her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. He pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the deep snow. The woman looked up at him with dark eyes that were glazed with cold and fear. She said something in a language he did not understand, her voice barely audible over the wind. She appeared to be about his age, perhaps a year or two younger, with high cheekbones and skin that would have been warm brown if not for the pallor of hypothermia setting in. Connor did not hesitate. He unbuttoned his heavy wool coat and pulled it off, immediately feeling the cold slam into him like a physical force. His hands were already stiff, making the buttons difficult to manage, but he persevered. The woman tried to protest, her frozen hands pushing weakly at him, but he was already draping the coat around her shoulders. "You need this more than I do," he said firmly, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. "I've got more layers underneath." It was only partially true. He had a flannel shirt and a wool vest, but without his coat, the cold was already working its way through them. Still, he had seen men die from exposure before, and this woman was much closer to that edge than he was. She looked up at him with those dark eyes, now showing confusion and something else he could not quite identify. Gratitude, perhaps, or disbelief. She pulled the coat tighter around herself with trembling hands, and Connor noticed her fingers were raw and bleeding, probably from trying to find shelter in the rocks. "Can you ride?" he asked, gesturing to his horse. The animal stamped nervously, its breath steaming in the cold night air. The woman seemed to understand his gesture if not his words. She nodded weakly, and Connor helped her to her feet. She was surprisingly light, and he realized with a pang of concern that she was probably half-starved as well as frozen. He lifted her onto his horse with as much gentleness as he could manage with his stiffening hands, then pulled himself up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her to hold the reins, and he could feel how violently she was shivering even through all the layers between them. "There is a cave about a mile ahead," he said, more to himself than to her. "We can get a fire going there, wait out the worst of this." He urged his horse forward, keeping one arm firmly around the woman to keep her from sliding off. The wind seemed to grow even more fierce, if that was possible, and Connor felt his own body beginning to shake from the cold. His teeth chattered so hard he thought they might crack, and his fingers were losing feeling where they gripped the reins. The mile felt like 10, but finally the dark opening of the cave appeared ahead, exactly where he remembered it from a previous journey through these mountains. He had sheltered there before during a summer rainstorm, and he knew it was deep enough to provide protection from the wind and weather. Connor dismounted clumsily, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. The cold had worked deeper into his muscles than he had realized. He reached up and helped the woman down, noting that her shivering had actually decreased, which was a bad sign. It meant her body was giving up the fight to stay warm. He led his horse into the cave entrance, then guided the woman deeper inside where the wind could not reach. His hands shook so badly that it took him 3 attempts to light a match, but finally, he got his small fire starter going. He always carried dried kindling and a bit of kerosene-soaked cloth for emergencies, and this definitely qualified. Within minutes, he had a small fire burning, and he quickly added larger pieces of wood from the pile he had left here months ago, silently thanking his past self for the forethought. The woman sank down near the fire, still wrapped in his coat. Connor began rubbing his arms vigorously, trying to force circulation back into his limbs. Once he felt reasonably certain he would not lose any fingers, he turned his attention back to his unexpected companion. "Let me see your hands," he said, kneeling beside her and reaching out. She hesitated, then slowly extended her hands toward him. They were in worse shape than he had thought, with the beginning of frostbite on several fingers. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out a clean cloth and some of the water from his canteen, which had thawed somewhat from being close to his body and now near the fire. Gently, he began cleaning the dirt and dried blood from her fingers, trying to be as careful as possible. The woman watched him work with those intense dark eyes, her expression unreadable. When he finished with her hands, he looked at her feet and saw that her moccasins were worn through in several places, her toes likely in similar condition to her fingers. He pulled off his own boots and then his thick wool socks. "Here," he said, holding them out to her. "Your feet need these worse than mine do." She shook her head vehemently, saying something in her language that he took to mean she would not accept them, but Connor was insistent. He gently removed her damaged moccasins, trying not to cause her more pain, and carefully slipped his warm socks onto her feet. They were far too large, but they would keep her toes from freezing. The fire was growing stronger now, filling the cave with blessed warmth and flickering orange light. Connor sat back against the cave wall, pulling his vest tighter around himself and tucking his bare feet under his legs for warmth. His body was still shaking from the cold, but the immediate danger had passed for both of them. "My name is Connor," he said, pointing to himself. "Connor Owens." The woman looked at him for a long moment, then touched her chest. "Mika," she said softly. "Mika Tatsukeh." Her voice was beautiful, he realized, even roughened by cold and exhaustion. It had a musical quality that made him want to hear her speak more, though he knew they shared no common language. "Mika," he repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. A small smile flickered across her face, the first he had seen, and it transformed her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "It is nice to meet you, Mika, though I wish it were under better circumstances." She tilted her head, clearly not understanding his words, but something in his tone seemed to reach her. She said something in her own language, her voice soft and earnest, and though Connor could not understand the words, he thought he caught the meaning. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, both of them warming themselves by the fire and recovering from their brush with death. Connor wondered what had brought her out here alone in the middle of a winter storm, Had she been separated from her people? Was she running from something or someone? But there was no way to ask, no way to communicate beyond gestures and tone. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake both of them. Connor added more wood to the fire, enough to keep it burning for several hours, then fashioned a rough bed from his saddle blanket and some pine boughs he gathered from just outside the cave entrance. He gestured for Mika to lie down near the fire where it was warmest. She hesitated, looking between him and the makeshift bed, then said something that sounded like a question. Connor understood she was asking where he would sleep. "I will be fine over here," he said, pointing to a spot on the other side of the fire. "You need the warmth more than I do." Mika frowned and shook her head. She patted the blanket beside her and said something insistent. When Connor did not move, she stood up, walked over to him, and actually took his hand to pull him toward the sleeping area. Her hand was still cold but warming, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt through him that had nothing to do with temperature. Connor allowed himself to be led, understanding her logic even if it made him uncomfortable. In survival situations, sharing body heat was practical, not improper. They both needed rest, and they would stay warmer together. Still, he was very careful to maintain a respectful distance as they lay down, keeping the coat spread over both of them like a blanket, while Mika also wrapped herself in part of the saddle blanket. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the cave walls. Connor could hear the wind howling outside, but here in their shelter, it felt almost peaceful. He closed his eyes, intending to rest for just a few minutes, but exhaustion dragged him down into sleep faster than he expected. He woke several times during the night, adding wood to the fire and checking to make sure Mika was breathing steadily. Each time she seemed more peaceful, her color better, her breathing even and regular. Once, he found that she had moved closer to him in her sleep, her head resting against his shoulder. He told himself it was just instinct, seeking warmth, but he could not deny the way his heart beat faster at the contact. When dawn began to break, sending pale light into the cave entrance, Connor woke to find Mika already awake, watching him with those dark eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Connor felt something shift in his chest, something he could not quite name but that felt significant nonetheless. "Good morning," he said softly. She responded in her language, and though he did not know the words, the gentle tone was unmistakable. Connor sat up carefully and moved to the cave entrance to assess the weather. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, sparkling in the early morning light. The sky was clear, promising a warmer day ahead. He turned back to Mika and gestured outside, then made walking motions with his fingers. She understood and nodded, standing up and moving to join him. She was still wearing his coat, and he found he liked seeing her in it, though he knew he would need it back for the journey ahead. Connor pulled on his boots, now dry from sitting near the fire all night, and began packing up their meager camp. Mika helped, moving efficiently despite still wearing his oversized socks. He hated to take them back, but his feet would not survive the snow without them. He tried to convey this through gestures, and though Mika looked reluctant, she removed the socks and handed them back to him. He put them on quickly, then examined her moccasins. They were in terrible shape, barely holding together. From his saddlebag, Connor pulled out a length of leather cord and an extra piece of canvas he carried for repairs. It took him about 20 minutes, but he managed to reinforce her moccasins significantly, wrapping the canvas around the worn spots and lacing it in place with the cord. It was not pretty, but it would keep her feet much warmer and drier. When he finished, Mika looked down at his handiwork with obvious surprise and pleasure. She looked up at him and said something in a voice full of warmth and gratitude, placing her hand over her heart in what was clearly a gesture of deep thanks. Connor felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "You are welcome," he said, wishing again that they could truly communicate. He saddled his horse and made sure the fire was completely out before leading the animal out of the cave. The sun was higher now, bright enough to make the snow almost painful to look at. Connor helped Mika mount, then swung up behind her as he had the night before. His plan was to take her back toward Cripple Creek, where he could at least find someone who might speak her language and help her get back to her people. But Mika had other ideas. As soon as they were both mounted, she turned partially around and pointed in the opposite direction from town, toward the higher mountains to the northwest. She said something urgent and gestured emphatically. Connor hesitated. That direction led deeper into the wilderness, away from safety and supplies. But something in Mika's expression told him this was important. Maybe her people were that way. Maybe she had been traveling to them when the storm caught her. "Are your people that way?" he asked, pointing in the direction she had indicated and making gathering motions with his hands to suggest a group. Mika nodded vigorously, relief flooding her face. She said something that included several repetitions of what he assumed were names or places, and pointed again. Connor made his decision. He had come this far and the weather was clear now. A few more hours would not make much difference, and he could not in good conscience abandon this woman before making sure she reached her people safely. "All right," he said. "We will go that way. But if it looks like another storm is coming, we turn back. Understand?" Mika probably did not understand most of his words, but she seemed to grasp his agreement because her face lit up with a smile that made Connor's breath catch. She settled back against him, and he urged his horse forward into the snow. They rode for several hours, following what must have been familiar landmarks to Mika, because she occasionally gestured for him to adjust their direction. The landscape was breathtaking, with massive pines weighted down with fresh snow and mountains rising dramatically against the brilliant blue sky. Connor's horse plodded steadily through the deep snow, its breath steaming in the cold air. As they rode, Connor became increasingly aware of Mika's presence in front of him. The way her hair smelled of wood smoke and something else, something sweet and indefinable. The way she fit perfectly in the circle of his arms. The way her back pressed against his chest, warm despite all the layers between them. He tried to focus on the trail ahead, on watching for signs of danger or changing weather, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman he held. It was foolish, he told himself. They had known each other less than a day. They could not even speak to one another. And yet something about her called to him in a way he had never experienced before. It was more than just her beauty, though she was certainly beautiful. It was something in her spirit, in the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite being found nearly frozen to death. In the way she smiled. In the way she had insisted on sharing warmth with him in the cave, refusing to let him suffer alone. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and share some of the dried beef and hardtack Connor carried in his saddlebags. It was not much, but Mika accepted her share gratefully. They sat on a fallen log that Connor brushed free of snow, eating in companionable silence and watching a hawk circle overhead. Mika pointed to the bird and said something in her language, her tone wistful. Then she looked at Connor and very deliberately said, "Hawk," in English, pointing to herself and then to the bird. Connor understood. She was trying to teach him. He smiled and repeated, "Hawk," then pointed to himself and said, "Connor," very slowly and clearly. This became a game between them as they resumed their journey. Mika would point to things and say their names in her language, and Connor would respond with the English word. Snow, tree, sky, horse, son. Neither of them learned much, but the attempt at communication brought them closer, and Connor treasured every small connection they made. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley below. Connor's breath caught, but not from the beauty of the landscape. Spread across the valley floor was a native encampment of perhaps 40 tipis, smoke rising from cooking fires, people moving about their daily business. Mika stiffened in his arms and said something in an urgent tone, pointing down at the camp. Connor understood. These were her people. He had successfully brought her home. He should have felt relief. Mission accomplished, good deed done, time to head back to Cripple Creek and his own life. But instead, what he felt was a sharp pang of loss. Once he delivered her to her people, he would never see her again. The thought was surprisingly painful, but there was no help for it. Connor guided his horse down the slope toward the camp, moving slowly so as not to appear threatening. He saw people beginning to notice them, saw pointing fingers and gathering clusters of people. By the time they reached the valley floor, a group of armed men was moving toward them, their faces stern and unwelcoming. Connor pulled his horse to a stop and raised one hand in a gesture of peace, keeping the other arm around Mika to keep her steady on the horse. The men approached warily, weapons at the ready. Connor noticed they carried a mix of bows, rifles, and spears, and he had no doubt they knew how to use them effectively. Then Mika called out something in a loud, clear voice. The effect was immediate. The men stopped short, their aggressive postures softening into surprise and confusion. One of them, a tall man with gray streaking his long black hair, lowered his rifle and stepped forward, saying something in a questioning tone. Mika responded rapidly, gesturing to Connor and then to herself, clearly explaining what had happened. Connor caught his own name in the flow of her words and what might have been the English word, coat. The older man looked up at Connor with sharp, assessing eyes. He said something brief, and two younger men stepped forward to help Mika down from the horse. She slid off gracefully despite her exhaustion, and Connor immediately felt the loss of her warmth against him. More people were gathering now, including several women who rushed forward to embrace Mika, their voices raised in obvious relief and joy. Connor dismounted as well, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. He was acutely aware that he was alone and surrounded by people who had plenty of reasons to distrust white men. The stories of broken treaties and stolen land and outright violence were well known, even if many in the white communities chose to ignore them. The older man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Connor's face. He was perhaps 50 years old, his face weathered and scarred, his bearing that of a leader or warrior. He gestured for Connor to follow him, and Connor did so, leading his horse behind him. They walked through the camp, drawing curious and sometimes hostile stares from the people they passed. Children ran alongside them, chattering excitedly until their mothers called them back. Dogs barked and circled, sniffing at Connor and his horse. The camp was well organized, with the tipis arranged in a rough circle and various work areas set up for cooking, tanning hides, and other tasks. Connor could see that, despite the harsh winter, these people were surviving and maintaining their community and traditions. The older man led him to one of the larger tipis near the center of the camp. He gestured for Connor to wait outside, then disappeared inside. Connor stood there, holding his horse's reins and trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Several armed men had positioned themselves nearby, not threatening but definitely watchful. After a few minutes, the older man emerged and gestured for Connor to enter. Connor secured his horse to a nearby post, noting that someone had already brought water for the animal, then ducked through the tipi entrance. Inside, it was warm and smoky from a central fire. Several people sat around the fire, including the older man, another older man who Connor took to be a chief or elder based on the deference shown him, and Mika. Someone had given her a blanket, which she had wrapped around herself, and she was speaking earnestly to the gathered group. The elder chief gestured for Connor to sit, and he did so, keeping his hands visible and his posture respectful. Mika finished speaking and looked at him, her expression unreadable. The chief studied Connor for a long moment, then spoke in halting but comprehensible English. "You help my granddaughter," he said, his voice deep and rough. "This the white man's coat she wear." Connor's eyes widened slightly. So Mika was the chief's granddaughter. That explained the strong reaction when she had called out. He nodded and said, "Yes, sir. I found her by the trail last night, nearly frozen. I could not leave her to die in the cold." The chief translated this for the others, and a brief discussion ensued. Connor noticed Mika watching him, her dark eyes intense. He wished he could read her expression, wished he could know what she was thinking. Finally, the chief turned back to Connor. "My granddaughter say you give coat in bad storm, give your socks, fix her shoes, share fire and blanket, keep her safe." He paused, his eyes boring into Connor's. "You show honor when you have no reason to do this, when our peoples are not friends." Connor chose his words carefully. "I believe any decent person would have done the same, sir. Your granddaughter needed help and I was in a position to provide it. That is all." More translation, more discussion. The older man who had first met Connor said something sharp and emphatic, gesturing toward the tipi entrance. Another man argued back, his tone heated. Mika said something quiet but firm, and the men fell silent. The chief nodded slowly, then looked at Connor again. "You must stay this night. Too late to travel, and we owe you hospitality for saving granddaughter's life. Tomorrow at sunrise we will speak again." It was not quite an order, but it was close. Connor nodded his acceptance. "Thank you for your hospitality, sir. I am grateful." The chief said something to the others, and people began to rise. Mika stood as well, glancing at Connor with an expression he could not quite read. Was that concern, warning? He was not sure. The older man who had first met him gestured for Connor to follow, and he was led to a smaller tipi at the edge of the camp. Inside, someone had laid out a thick pile of furs for sleeping and left a small fire burning. There was also a wooden bowl containing some kind of stew and a water skin. The older man gestured to these provisions, then pointed firmly at Connor and then at the ground, clearly indicating he should stay here. Connor nodded his understanding and the man left, though Connor noticed he positioned himself just outside the tipi entrance. Guard or protector, Connor was not entirely sure which. He sat down heavily on the furs, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The last 2 days had taken their toll, and his body ached from the cold and the long hours in the saddle. He ate the stew slowly, finding it surprisingly good, full of meat and roots, and flavored with herbs he did not recognize. The warmth in his belly and the heat from the fire began to lull him toward sleep, but his mind would not quiet. What had Mika told them? Why had the chief insisted he stay until morning? And what would happen at sunrise? The words, "we will speak again," felt weighted with significance, though Connor could not imagine why. He had helped someone in need, nothing more. Surely they would thank him, perhaps give him some supplies for his journey and send him on his way back to Cripple Creek. And yet, something in the way the chief had looked at him, in the way those men had argued, in the way Mika had watched him with those dark, intense eyes, suggested it would not be that simple. Connor lay down on the furs, pulling his coat tighter around himself. At some point during the day, Mika had returned it to him, and he had given her back the blankets he had used. His coat still smelled faintly of her, that sweet, indefinable scent that made his chest tighten. He thought about her as he drifted toward sleep. The way she had looked nearly frozen by the boulder, so vulnerable and small. The way she had insisted on sharing the warmth in the cave, refusing to let him suffer alone. The way her smile had transformed her face. The way she had felt in his arms all day as they rode toward her home. Connor fell asleep with her name on his lips, not knowing that beyond the tippy walls, important decisions were being made about his future. He woke to voices outside his tippy, speaking in low, urgent tones. The fire had burned down to coals, and gray dawn light was beginning to filter through the smoke hole at the top of the tippy. Connor sat up quickly, reaching instinctively for his gun belt before remembering that someone had removed it while he slept, along with his boots. They sat neatly by the fire, within reach but clearly taken as a precaution. The tippy flap opened, and the older warrior from yesterday entered, followed by two younger men. Their faces were serious but not hostile. The older man gestured for Connor to put on his boots and follow them, which Connor did with growing trepidation. He buckled on his gun belt, noting that his weapons were still in place, which was somewhat reassuring. Outside, the camp was just waking up. Smoke rose from morning fires, and people moved about their early tasks. But Connor noticed many of them stopping to watch as he was escorted through the camp, their expressions curious and speculative. They led him not to the chief's tippy, but to an open area near the center of the camp. Connor's heart sank as he saw what awaited him there. Perhaps 100 people had gathered in a rough circle, men, women, and children, all watching with interest. At the center of the circle stood the chief, the older warrior, several other men who looked like elders or important members of the tribe, and Mika. She was dressed differently this morning, in a beautiful buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and quillwork. Her long black hair was braided with what looked like small shells woven through it, and she wore a necklace of turquoise and silver. She looked like a princess, Connor thought, then realized that as the chief's granddaughter, she probably was the equivalent of one. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes downcast. Connor was led to stand before the chief, facing him across the fire that burned in the center of the circle. The crowd fell silent, and Connor felt his mouth go dry. Whatever this was, it was clearly significant. The chief began to speak, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. He spoke for several minutes in his own language, and Connor caught a few repeated words that he thought might be Mika and possibly his own name, but the rest was incomprehensible. He noticed many people nodding as the chief spoke, while others frowned or looked concerned. Finally, the chief turned to Connor and switched to English. "Connor Owens, you saved life of my granddaughter Mika. She is precious to our people, daughter of my daughter who died bringing her into this world. I raise Mika as my own child. She is my heart." Connor nodded, not trusting his voice. The chief continued, "Our laws say when someone saved life, that person has claim on that life. They are bound together." He paused, studying Connor's face. "My granddaughter's life belonged to you now by our old ways, but we also live in changing times when old ways meet new world, so I give you choice and I give Mika choice too." Connor felt his heart hammering in his chest. Where was this going? "First choice," the chief said, holding up one finger. "You take Mika as your wife. You join our people, learn our ways, live among us. Mika will teach you our language, our customs. You will be part of our family, protected and honored as one who saved my granddaughter and chose to join us." Connor's mind reeled. Marriage? They had only known each other for a day. And yet, even as his practical mind raised objections, something deeper responded to the idea with fierce, unexpected longing. Second choice, the chief continued, holding up 2 fingers. You leave now. We give you supplies, a good horse, and our thanks. You return to your people and forget us. Mika stays here, finds husband among our own people when time is right. You never see her again. The chief lowered his hands and looked directly into Connor's eyes. Third choice, and this is new thing, not from old ways but from thinking about how world changes. You take Mika as wife, but you return to your town. She lives in white man's world with you. This is hardest path, because our peoples do not trust each other, and life will be difficult for you both. But if you truly care for each other, if love grows strong enough, maybe this path leads somewhere good. The chief stepped back slightly. These are your choices, Connor Owens. But before you choose, Mika must choose too. She must say if she will accept you, if she wants any of these paths that include you. Our women are not property to be traded. She has voice in her future. The chief turned to Mika and said something in their language. She looked up, first at her grandfather, then at Connor. Their eyes met across the fire, and Connor felt that same jolt he had felt in the cave, that sense of connection that defied logic and time. Mika spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She spoke for perhaps a minute, and Connor watched her face, trying to read her meaning from her expression. She looked serious but not unhappy, determined but also uncertain. When she finished, she looked down again, a flush rising in her cheeks. The chief turned back to Connor. My granddaughter say she feels something for you she not expect. Say you show more honor in one night than many men show in lifetime. Say she thinks about you when she should think about other things. Say she is willing to try if you are willing to try. He paused. But she also say she is afraid. Afraid of leaving her people. Afraid of white man's world that has brought so much pain to our people. Afraid that what she feels is just gratitude and not something deeper. Connor's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He looked at Mika, trying to will her to look up at him again to meet his eyes. When she finally did, he saw his own confusion and fear and hope reflected back at him. May I speak with her? Connor asked the chief. Alone, just for a few minutes. The chief frowned, clearly not expecting this request. There was murmuring from the crowd. But then Mika said something, and the chief's expression softened slightly. He nodded once. You may speak at edge of circle where all can see but not hear. You have until sun touches top of that mountain. He pointed to a peak to the east where the rising sun was climbing. That is perhaps 10 minutes of your white man's time. Connor nodded gratefully. He walked to the edge of the circle, aware of every eye upon him, and Mika followed. They stood facing each other, the noise of the camp and the watching crowd fading into background as they focused on each other. I wish we could truly talk, Connor said softly. I wish I knew your language or you knew more of mine. Mika tilted her head, clearly catching his tone if not his words. She reached out tentatively and touched his coat, the one he had given her last night. Coat, she said in English. Then she pointed to the cave opening in the mountains above. Fire. She pointed to the repaired moccasins on her feet. Help. Finally, she placed her hand over her heart and said something in her own language that Connor thought might mean good or kind. Connor understood. She was telling him that action spoke louder than words, that they had communicated more in one night than some people did in years of conversation. He reached out and gently took her hand, the one she had placed over her heart. Her fingers were warm now, healed from the frostbite, though still showing faint marks where the cold had damaged them. Mika, he said, looking into her eyes. I know this is fast, I know it is crazy. But I have felt something since the moment I saw you by that boulder, and it has only grown stronger. I do not know if it is love, not yet, but I think it could become love. I want the chance to find out. She watched his face intently, and he could tell she was understanding him through more than just his words. He continued, speaking slowly and carefully. "But I will not take you away from your people unless you truly want to come. And I will not stay here if my presence will bring danger or difficulty to your tribe. We need to find a way that honors both of us, both our peoples." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "What do you want, Mika?" "Not what your grandfather wants, not what I want, but what you want in your heart." Mika looked down at their joined hands, and Connor saw a tear slide down her cheek. She said something in her language, her voice thick with emotion, and though he did not understand the words, he felt the weight of them. She looked back up at him and spoke again, and this time he caught one English word in the flow of her speech. "Stay." Connor's breath caught. "You want me to stay here? With your people?" Mika nodded, then shook her head, then made a frustrated sound. She gestured to him, then to herself, then made a motion that seemed to encompass the whole camp. She was trying to say something complex, something about togetherness and place, but the language barrier was too great. Then she did something that surprised him. She went up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft and brief and sweet. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide with her own boldness, but she did not look away. "Together," she said clearly in English. "Together stay." Connor understood then. She did not care where they were, his world or hers, as long as they were together. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely insane, and it was exactly what he felt too. "Together," he agreed, his voice rough. "We stay together." They walked back to the center of the circle hand in hand, and the crowd's murmuring grew louder. The chief looked at their joined hands, and something like satisfaction crossed his weathered face. "You have chosen," he asked Connor. "We have chosen," Connor corrected gently. "We choose each other, but the question of where we live and how, that needs more time and more talk. We cannot make such a big decision in minutes." The chief frowned. "You ask to delay our tradition. This is not how it is done." "With respect, sir," Connor said, "this is not a traditional situation. I am not from your people, and times are changing, as you yourself said. Mika and I need time to know each other, to learn each other's language, to understand what we are choosing. Give us that time." Mika said something to her grandfather in their language, her tone respectful but insistent. The chief looked between them, clearly torn between tradition and pragmatism. Finally, he sighed and spoke to the gathered crowd. There was immediate reaction, some voices raised in what sounded like protest, others in agreement. The chief raised his hand for silence. When the crowd quieted, he turned back to Connor and Mika. "Very well. We make new tradition for new times. You, Connor Owens, will stay with our people for one full cycle of moon. You will learn our ways, our language, our customs. Mika will decide in that time if you are truly the man she wants. You will decide if you can truly be part of our people, or if you will take Mika to your world. At end of one moon, you both will choose again, and that choice will be final." The chief paused, his expression stern. "But know this. If you hurt my granddaughter, if you treat her with anything less than honor and respect, there will be price to pay. I may be old, but I still know how to make a man regret his actions." Connor met the chief's eyes steadily. "I understand, sir, and I give you my word that I will treat Mika with all the honor and respect she deserves. Whatever we decide at the end of this moon, I will not hurt her if I can help it." The chief nodded slowly, then turned to Mika and said something in their language. She responded quietly, her hand still holding Connor's. The chief looked at their joined hands again, and this time a small smile flickered across his face. "Very well," he said. "Let it be known that Connor Owens is guest of our people for one moon. He is under my protection and should be treated with courtesy and respect. Anyone who harms him will answer to me." He looked around the circle at his people, his gaze stern and commanding. And let it also be known that my granddaughter Mika has claimed this man as her choice, if they both decide to follow this path when the moon is full again. We will honor their decision, whatever it may be." The crowd began to disperse, some people looking pleased, others skeptical or concerned. Connor felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had just committed to spending a month with people whose language he did not speak, learning ways that were foreign to him, all for a woman he had known for less than 2 days. And yet, when he looked down at Mika, who was looking back up at him with hope and uncertainty and something that might become love written across her beautiful face, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The next weeks were the most challenging and rewarding of Connor's life. He moved into a tipi near Mika's family, though they were carefully chaperoned at all times, which he appreciated. Her grandfather and the other elders were taking no chances with propriety, which Connor understood and respected. Every day brought new lessons. The older warrior who had first met Connor, whose name he learned was Tatsukeh, became his primary teacher. Tatsukeh spoke some English, learned from traders years ago, and he used it to help Connor learn the language of the people, which he discovered was Arapaho. The words felt strange in Connor's mouth at first, the sounds and rhythms so different from English, but gradually they became more natural. Mika was also his teacher, and these were the lessons Connor treasured most. They would walk together through the camp or into the nearby woods, always with a chaperone trailing at a respectful distance, and she would point to things and tell him their names: tree, river, sky, bird. But she also taught him more abstract things, helping him understand the way her people viewed the world, so different from the individualistic mindset of the white settlers he knew. Everything was connected, she tried to explain in her halting English, which was improving as rapidly as his Arapaho. The land, the animals, the people, the spirits. To harm one thing was to harm all things. To honor one thing was to honor all things. It was a beautiful philosophy, and Connor found himself drawn to it, even as he recognized how different it was from the conquering, claiming mindset of his own people. He learned practical skills too. How to hunt with a bow, though he was terrible at it at first, much to the amusement of the children who would gather to watch him practice. How to tan hides, boring and smelly work but satisfying when done well. How to track animals through the snow. How to read weather signs in the clouds and the behavior of birds and animals. But more than skills, he was learning about people. He shared meals with families, sitting around fires and listening to stories told in a language he increasingly understood. He played with children, who were less inhibited than the adults and treated him with friendly curiosity. He worked alongside men, who gradually warmed to him as they saw he was willing to work hard and learn, and through it all, he fell deeper in love with Mika. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way she laughed when he completely butchered a word in Arapaho, her whole face lighting up with joy. The way she patiently corrected him, saying the word over and over until he got it right. The way she shared her food with him, the way her people shared everything, making sure everyone had enough before anyone took extra. He loved watching her with the children, gentle and playful. He loved seeing her work, her hands quick and skilled as she sewed quill work or prepared food or did any of the 100 tasks that kept the camp running. He loved the way she looked at him when she thought he was not watching, her expression soft and wondering. They talked for hours, their improving grasp of each other's languages allowing deeper conversation. She told him about her life, growing up without a mother but surrounded by her grandfather's love and the care of the whole tribe. She told him about her fears for her people, about the increasing pressure from white settlers and the government, about treaties broken and land stolen. Connor listened and learned, and his eyes were open to injustices he had not fully understood before. He had known, in an abstract way, that native peoples were being mistreated, but hearing it from Mika, seeing the real fear and anger and grief in her eyes, made it real in a way it had never been before. He told her about his life too, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about his parents dying of fever when he was 16, about drifting west looking for work and purpose, about feeling like he never quite fit anywhere, never quite found the place where he belonged. "Maybe you belong here," Mika said one evening as they sat by the river, their chaperone a discreet distance away. Her English was much better now, though still accented. "With us. With me." Connor looked at her, at the way the setting sun turned her skin golden, at the hope in her eyes. "Maybe I do," he said softly. "I have never felt like I belonged anywhere as much as I have started to feel here." But he was also honest with her about his concerns. "I worry about bringing more danger to your people. White men do not like to see one of their own choosing to live with native peoples. I worry I would make things harder for you, not easier." Mika was quiet for a moment, trailing her fingers in the cold water. "My grandfather says times are changing. Says we cannot live as we always have, pretending white men will go away. Maybe having bridge between our peoples is a good thing. Maybe that is why spirits brought you to me that night." It was a beautiful thought, but Connor knew the reality was more complicated. Still, he wanted to believe it was possible. He wanted to believe they could build a life together that honored both their backgrounds. As the weeks passed, Connor became more integrated into the life of the camp. He was no longer a stranger but a familiar presence. Men nodded to him in greeting. Women included him in the communal work. Children ran to him to show him their latest treasures or to ask him to play. He was becoming part of the fabric of the community, and it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. The moon grew fuller in the night sky, marking the passage of time. Connor knew the day of decision was approaching, and he could see the tension growing in Mika as well. They had not spoken directly about what choice they would make, both of them perhaps afraid to voice their desires in case the other did not share them, but Connor knew what his choice would be. He had known for weeks, really, but he wanted to be absolutely certain. He wanted to make sure he was not just caught up in the romance of it all, in the intensity of their unusual situation. So he waited and watched and worked and learned, and with each passing day, he became more certain. He loved her, truly, deeply, completely loved her. And more than that, he loved this life, these people, this way of seeing the world. He wanted to stay not just for her, but because this felt like home in a way no place ever had before. The night before the full moon, Connor could not sleep. He lay in his tipi, staring up at the smoke hole and the stars beyond, and thought about the next day. Would Mika choose him? She had seemed to grow to care for him as he cared for her, but what if she had decided the risks were too great? What if her grandfather or the other elders had convinced her it was too dangerous to bind herself to a white man? He must have finally dozed off because he woke to someone calling his name softly from outside his tipi. He sat up quickly, disoriented, and called out, "Who is there?" "It is Tatsukeh." "Come. The chief wants to speak with you before the sun rises." Connor dressed quickly and emerged from his tipi to find Tatsukeh waiting, his expression unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. They walked through the silent camp to the chief's tipi, and Connor's heart hammered with nervousness. Was something wrong? Had the chief decided to reject his suit after all? Inside the tipi, the chief sat by the fire, looking older than Connor had seen him before. He gestured for Connor to sit, and Tatsukeh took a position near the entrance. For a long moment the chief said nothing, just studied Connor with those sharp, dark eyes. Finally, he spoke in Arapaho, which Connor could now understand reasonably well. "You have learned much in one moon," the chief said. "You speak our language. You understand our ways. You work hard and show respect. My people have come to accept you." Connor nodded, not trusting his voice. "But I am old man and I worry for my granddaughter's future," the chief continued. "I see the way you look at her. I see the way she looks at you. I believe you care for each other truly. But love is not always enough in this world." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "I have seen white men come with promises and leave with lies. I have seen treaties made and treaties broken. I have seen my people pushed from land to land, always moving, always losing. And I fear what future holds." Connor felt the weight of history in the old man's words. He chose his response carefully, speaking in Arapaho. "I cannot promise I can protect Mika from everything that is coming. I cannot promise that my being with her will not sometimes make things harder. But I can promise that I will love her and honor her for all of my days. I can promise that I will learn and keep learning, that I will respect her people and their ways. And I can promise that I will never ask her to be less than who she is." The chief looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That is good promise, better than many men make," he sighed. "I give my blessing to this match, Connor Owens. My granddaughter has chosen and I will honor her choice, but I have one thing to ask of you." "Anything, sir." "Stay with us. Live among our people. I know this is much to ask, to leave your world for ours, but we need strong young people to help us survive what is coming. And Mika, she is heart of this tribe. I do not want to lose her to white man's world." Connor had already made this decision, but hearing the chief's request confirmed it. "I will stay," he said firmly. "I want to stay. This has become my home and your people have become my people." Relief flooded the chief's face. "Good, that is good." He reached out and gripped Connor's shoulder. "Then at sunrise, when Mika makes her choice and you make yours, know that you have my blessing and my support. You will be my grandson, part of my family." Connor felt emotion tighten his throat. He had lost his own family years ago, and the idea of being part of a family again, of belonging, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you, sir. I will try to be worthy of that honor." The chief smiled, and for the first time, Connor saw real warmth in the old man's expression. "You already are, or we would not be having this conversation." When Connor emerged from the chief's tipi, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten. Takoda waited outside, and as they walked back through the awakening camp, the older warrior spoke quietly. "You have surprised me, Connor Owens. I did not think white man could learn our ways, could understand our hearts. But you have done both. I am proud to call you brother." Connor felt the weight and honor of those words. He clasped Takoda's arm in the way he had learned the Arapaho warriors did. "And I am proud to call you brother as well." By the time Connor returned to his tipi to prepare for the ceremony, the whole camp was stirring. Today was the day, the full moon, the day he and Mika would make their final choice. He washed carefully in the cold water from a nearby stream, braided his hair in the way Takoda had taught him, and dressed in the clothes that had been given to him over the past weeks. Buckskin pants and shirt decorated with simple but elegant quillwork, moccasins that fit perfectly, and a warm buffalo hide vest. He looked at himself in the small mirror he had brought from his saddlebags, and for a moment he hardly recognized himself. He looked like he belonged to this place, to these people. He looked like he had finally found where he was meant to be. When he emerged from his tipi, he found that the whole camp had gathered in the same ceremonial circle where he had first been given his choice. The morning sun painted everything gold, and the air was cold and crisp. Connor walked to the center of the circle, his heart pounding but his step steady. The chief stood waiting, dressed in his finest clothing, his face solemn and dignified. Beside him stood Takoda and the other elders, and across the fire from Connor stood Mika. She took his breath away. She wore a dress of white buckskin, so heavily decorated with beadwork and quillwork that it must have taken months to make. Her hair flowed loose down her back, with small white feathers woven through it. She wore a necklace of silver and turquoise that Connor had not seen before, clearly a significant piece. She looked like she belonged in a painting, like the embodiment of beauty and grace. But what made Connor's heart skip was not her appearance but her eyes. She looked at him with such open love and hope that he felt it like a physical warmth spreading through his chest. The chief began to speak, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. He spoke in Arapaho, and Connor understood every word. 1 moon ago, Connor Owens came to us as stranger who saved my granddaughter's life. We gave him choice: join us, leave us, or take Mika to his world. He asked for time to know if this choice was true. We gave him 1 moon to learn our ways and our hearts, and for Mika to learn his. The chief paused, looking around at his gathered people. Now the moon is full again, and the time has come for final choice. Connor Owens, do you choose to join our people? Do you choose to take Mika as your wife and live among us as one of us? Connor stepped forward, his voice strong and clear as he spoke in Arapaho. I choose to join your people. I choose Mika as my wife if she will have me. I choose this life, these ways, this community. I give my promise to learn and grow and honor all that you have taught me. I give my promise to be faithful and true to Mika all my days. I give my promise to stand with this tribe through whatever challenges come, to be not just husband to Mika but brother and son and friend to all of you. There was murmuring from the crowd, mostly approving from what Connor could hear. The chief nodded solemnly, then turned to Mika. Mika Tatsukeh, granddaughter of my heart, do you choose this man? Do you choose to take Connor Owens as your husband, knowing that he comes from a people who have brought much pain to ours? Do you choose to bind your life to his, for all the joys and sorrows that may come? Mika stepped forward, and Connor saw that her hands were shaking slightly. But her voice was steady as she spoke in Arapaho and then repeated in English, clearly wanting Connor to understand every word. I choose Connor Owens. I choose him not because he saved my life, though he did. Not because he is handsome, though he is. Not because tradition says I should, because tradition gave me choice. I choose him because in 1 moon he has shown me more respect and kindness than many men show in lifetime. Because he listened when I spoke. Because he learned our language and our ways with open heart. Because when he looks at me, he sees me, truly sees me, not just pretty woman or chief's granddaughter, but me. I choose him because I love him, and I believe we can build good life together. Her voice strengthened as she continued. I know there will be difficulties. I know our peoples do not always trust each other. But I also know that change comes whether we want it or not, and maybe Connor is a gift from spirits to help us navigate this change. Maybe love between our peoples is bridge we need. Or maybe he is just good man who came into my life when I needed him most. Either way, I choose him. I choose us. I choose love. Connor felt tears sting his eyes, not caring if it was considered unmanly. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and took Mika's hands in his, looking down into her beautiful face. I love you, he said in Arapaho, then in English. I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice. I love you too, Mika whispered, her eyes shining with tears. And I could never regret choosing you. The chief began to speak again, but Connor barely heard the ceremonial words. He was too focused on Mika, on the way her hands fit perfectly in his, on the way her eyes reflected the morning sun, On the way, his heart felt like it might burst from happiness. He became aware that people were cheering, that the chief was smiling, that Tatsukeh was actually laughing. The ceremony must have concluded, he realized. They were married. Mika was his wife. Mika was his wife. The thought filled him with wonder and joy and a fierce protective love. His wife. His partner. His home. The rest of the day passed in a blur of celebration. There was feasting, with more food than Connor had seen since arriving at the camp. There was dancing and singing, with people performing traditional dances and songs for the married couple. There were gifts, practical things like blankets and tools and food supplies, but also ceremonial things like a beautifully carved pipe and a necklace for Mika. Connor's favorite gift came from the children, who presented him with a small, somewhat lopsided pouch they had made themselves, decorated with their attempts at quillwork. It was imperfect and absolutely precious, and Connor thanked them with genuine warmth, making them giggle with delight. As the sun began to set, Tatsukeh approached Connor with a grin. "Time for you and your wife to retire to your new home," he said, gesturing to a tipi that Connor had not noticed before. It had been set up at the edge of the camp, positioned for both privacy and proximity to the chief's lodge. Connor felt heat rise in his cheeks, and Tatsukeh laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Go. Mika is already inside waiting for you, and do not worry, no chaperone tonight." He winked and walked away, leaving Connor standing there feeling nervous for the first time all day. He walked slowly to the tipi, aware of good-natured calls and laughter from some of the people around the fires. At the entrance he paused, suddenly uncertain. Then he heard Mika's voice from inside, speaking in English. "Connor, come in. It is your home too now." He ducked through the entrance and found Mika sitting by a small fire, still in her beautiful wedding dress. She had taken off the elaborate necklace and the feathers from her hair, and she looked more like the woman he had found by the boulder that night, vulnerable and real. "Hi," he said softly, letting the tipi flap close behind him. "Hi," she responded, a small smile playing on her lips. "So we are married." "We are married," Connor confirmed, sitting down across the fire from her. "Are you sorry?" "Not even little bit," Mika said immediately. "Are you?" "Not at all. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Mika said, "I am nervous." "Is that silly?" "To be nervous with man I chose to marry, I am nervous too," Connor admitted. "But I promise you, Mika, we will figure this out together, all of it. The big things and the small things, we will learn as we go." Mika smiled, and this time it was the bright, full smile that Connor loved. "Together," she agreed. "Everything together." She stood and moved around the fire to sit beside him, and Connor wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She fit perfectly against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. "Tell me about tomorrow," she said softly, "when all celebrating is done and normal life begins." "What will we do?" Connor thought about it. "I suppose I will continue learning to hunt better, to track better, to understand more of your language and customs. I will work with the other men, help provide for the tribe. And I will wake up every morning grateful that I get to spend another day with you." Mika turned her face up toward his. "That sounds like good life." "It sounds like the best life," Connor agreed. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little faster, Mika's eyes were soft and dark. "I love you, Connor Owens," she whispered. "My husband." "I love you, Mika Owens," he responded, savoring the way her name sounded with his last name. "My wife." The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the tipi walls as they sat together, holding each other and talking quietly. learning the intimate rhythms of each other's thoughts and hearts. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the celebration continuing, but here in their private space, it was just the two of them, beginning their life together. The following months brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Connor threw himself into learning everything he could about Arapaho life and customs. He improved his hunting skills, though he would never be as naturally gifted as some of the men who had grown up with a bow in their hands. He learned about medicinal plants from the tribal healers, about spiritual practices from the elders, about childcare from the mothers as Mika taught him in preparation for their own eventual children. Because they did want children, they discovered in their late-night talks. Several children, if the spirits blessed them. The idea of raising a family here, in this community where children were treasured and raised by the whole tribe, felt right to both of them. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Connor and Mika worked side by side, helping plant the crops that would sustain the tribe through the next winter. They gathered wild plants and hunted small game together, and Connor found a deep satisfaction in the rhythms of this life, so connected to the land and seasons. But it was not all peaceful. As spring turned to summer, they began to hear more reports of conflicts between whites and native peoples in other areas. Rumors of violence, of land being seized, of treaties being ignored. The mood in the camp grew tense and worried, and Connor found himself in the awkward position of being white among people who had every reason to fear and distrust whites. But his presence also proved valuable in unexpected ways. When a group of white traders came through in late summer, Connor was able to negotiate on behalf of the tribe, his skin color and fluent English giving him an advantage. He made sure the trades were fair, that the tribe got good value for their furs and craftwork. The traders seemed confused by a white man living among the Arapaho, but they respected his position. After they left, the chief called Connor to his tipi. "You did well today," he said. "You used your advantages to help your people. This is what I hoped for when I asked you to stay." "My people," Connor repeated, feeling the weight and warmth of those words. "Thank you for accepting me as one of you," the chief smiled. "You earned that acceptance, Connor, and you continue to earn it every day." As summer ripened and then began to fade toward fall, Mika started feeling unwell in the mornings. Connor's heart leaped with hope, but he tried not to get too excited until one of the tribal healers confirmed what they both suspected. Mika was pregnant. The news spread through the camp like wildfire, greeted with celebration and joy. A new life was always cause for happiness, but this child was special, the child of the chief's granddaughter and the white man who had proven himself worthy of joining the tribe. People speculated endlessly about what the child would look like, whether it would be a boy or girl, whether it would have Connor's blue eyes or Mika's dark ones. Connor found himself overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. He was going to be a father. He was going to raise a child here in this community, teaching them to navigate both their heritages. It was a huge responsibility, but looking at Mika's glowing face, her hand resting on her still flat belly, he felt ready for it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Mika continued her usual activities for as long as the healers deemed it safe, and Connor hovered protectively, earning good-natured teasing from the other women about being an overly anxious father. Winter came again, and Connor could hardly believe it had been a year since that night he found Mika by the boulder. So much had changed. He had changed in ways he could never have imagined. He was no longer a drifter, a man without purpose or home. He was a husband, soon to be a father. He was a member of a community, with responsibilities and relationships, and a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. One evening in deep winter, Connor and Mika sat in their tipi, warm and comfortable despite the howling wind outside. Mika was working on a small pair of moccasins for the baby while Connor repaired a tear in his hunting gear. "Connor," Mika said softly. "Yes, my love. Do you ever regret it, giving up your old life?" Connor set down his work and moved to sit beside her. He took her hand, still marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. "Not for a single moment. That night I found you in the snow, I thought I was just helping someone who needed it. I had no idea I was finding my future, my purpose, my home." Mika leaned against him, her belly rounded with their child. "I think about that night too, how scared I was, how cold, how I thought I would die there. And then you appeared, this stranger who gave me warmth when he had no reason to trust me or help me. I had every reason to help you. You needed help. But many people would not have stopped. Many white men would not have helped Arapaho woman. You were different. You are different." Connor kissed the top of her head. "I think we were meant to find each other that night. I think the spirits, as you say, or God, or fate, or whatever force governs the universe, brought us together for a reason." "I think so too," Mika agreed. "I think maybe we are a small part of bigger change that needs to happen. Maybe our child will be bridge between peoples. Maybe more people will see that love is stronger than hate, that we are all human beneath skin color and language." "Maybe," Connor said. "Or maybe we are just two people who found each other and fell in love. Either way, I am grateful." Mika looked up at him, her eyes soft. "I am grateful too. For you, for this life, for this child." She paused. "I love you, Connor Owens, more than I knew I could love someone. I love you too, Mika, more than all the stars in the sky." They sat together in the warmth of their home, listening to the wind outside and the crackling of their fire, holding each other and the promise of their future. When spring came again, so did their child. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often were, and Connor paced outside the birth tipi for hours, listening to Mika's cries and feeling helpless. The women had banned him from the tipi, saying his nervous energy was making Mika more anxious. Takoda sat with him, keeping him company during the long wait. "First child is always hardest," he said. "But Mika is strong, she will be fine." "You cannot know that," Connor said, his voice rough with fear. He had heard too many stories of women dying in childbirth, and the thought of losing Mika was unbearable. "I know that worrying will not help," Takoda said practically. "Trust in the healers, trust in Mika, and pray to whatever God you believe in." Connor did pray, more fervently than he ever had in his life. He prayed to the Christian God of his childhood and to the spirits of Mika's people, not caring if it was contradictory, just wanting any power that existed to protect his wife and child. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the wail of a baby. His heart leaped and he rushed to the tipi entrance, only to be stopped by one of the older women. "Wait," she said firmly. "Let them clean the child and tend to your wife first." Connor forced himself to wait, though every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the woman emerged with a smile. "You have son, strong, healthy boy, and Mika is tired but well." Connor felt tears of relief stream down his face. "Can I see them?" "Yes, go to your family." Connor entered the tipi to find Mika lying on a pile of furs, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft leather. She looked up at Connor with a smile that lit up her whole face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Connor knelt beside them, hardly daring to breathe as Mika pulled back the leather to reveal a tiny, perfect face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and skin that was somewhere between Mika's brown and Connor's pale, a perfect blending of both of them. As Connor watched, the baby opened his eyes and Connor gasped. They were blue, bright blue like his own. "He is perfect," Connor whispered. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you just brought our son into the world. We brought him into the world, Mika corrected gently. Together. Everything together, remember. Connor carefully took the baby into his arms, marveling at how light and small he was. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to the world. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know." The baby made a small sound, and Connor felt his heart completely melt. "What should we name him?" Mika asked. They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy. They wanted something that honored both their heritages, something that would allow their son to navigate both worlds. "What about Caleb?" Connor suggested. "It was my father's name, and for a middle name, something from your language." Mika considered this. "Caleb Makia Owens. Makia means eagle in our language, for his spirit to soar high and see far." "Caleb Makia Owens," Connor repeated, testing the sound of it. "I love it." He looked down at his son, at this tiny person who was part of him and part of Mika, part of both their worlds. "Welcome, Caleb Makia Owens. We are so happy you are here." The next years passed in a blur of joy and growth. Caleb thrived, growing into a bright, curious boy who was equally comfortable speaking English and Arapaho. He looked like a perfect blend of both his parents, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair and features. He was beloved by the whole tribe, particularly by his great-grandfather, the chief, who doted on him shamelessly. Connor continued to grow as a member of the tribe. He became known as a skilled negotiator, using his understanding of both white and Arapaho culture to help navigate the increasingly complex relationships between the peoples. It was difficult work, often frustrating, as he watched treaties violated and promises broken by the government he had once been part of. But he did what he could, advocating for fairness and understanding wherever possible. Mika became a respected voice among the women, known for her wisdom and kind heart. She and Connor's relationship deepened with each passing year, moving from the passionate intensity of new love to something richer and more profound. They had their disagreements. Of course, no marriage was without conflict, but they had learned to communicate, to listen, to find compromise. When Caleb was 3, they welcomed a daughter whom they named Mika Tatsukeh. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's lighter skin, and a disposition so cheerful that she could make anyone smile. Caleb adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector from the moment he first saw her. 2 years later came another son, Samuel Kohana, who looked most like Connor of all their children. And finally, when Maya was 4, they welcomed another daughter, Rose Takara, named partially in honor of Takoda, who had become like a brother to Connor. Their tipi was always full of noise and laughter, and sometimes tears. Connor learned to braid his daughter's hair and to teach his sons to hunt. Mika taught all their children the stories and traditions of her people, while Connor made sure they also knew about their white heritage. They wanted their children to be proud of both sides of their ancestry, to see themselves as bridges between worlds rather than caught between them. The chief grew old gracefully, always with a grandchild or great-grandchild on his knee, always ready with a story or a piece of wisdom. When Caleb was 8, the chief gathered the whole family together one evening, his expression serious. "I am old now," he said without preamble. "My bones ache and I feel the pull of the spirit world. I do not have many seasons left." "Grandfather," Mika protested, but he held up his hand. "This is not sadness. I have lived long, good life. I have seen my granddaughter happy with good man. I have seen great-grandchildren grow strong and bright. I have seen my people survive difficult times, and I have hope they will continue to survive." He looked at Connor. "When I first saw you, white man who gave coat to my granddaughter, I did not know what to think. I was suspicious, worried. But I am old man, so I gave you chance, and you proved me right to do so. You became good husband, good father, good member of our tribe. You used your position between both worlds to help our people. You raised children who honor both their heritages. The chief's eyes grew misty. Thank you, Connor Owens, for saving my granddaughter's life that night. And thank you for all the years since, for loving her well and being true to your promises. You have become grandson of my heart in truth. Connor felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for accepting me, for trusting me with Mika, for welcoming me into your family. You gave me something I had lost: a home, a purpose, a family. I will never forget that gift. They sat together that evening, 3 generations, telling stories and laughing and holding each other close. The chief passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, and the whole tribe mourned him. But there was celebration too, celebration of a long life well lived, of wisdom passed down, of love that continued beyond death. As years passed, Connor and Mika watched their children grow. Caleb became a leader among the young people, strong and thoughtful like his great-grandfather. Maya inherited her mother's gift with healing herbs and spent long hours with the tribal healers, learning their arts. Samuel became a skilled hunter and craftsman, his hands clever with leather and wood. And Rose, their youngest, showed signs of her father's gift for languages and negotiation, able to charm anyone with her bright smile and quick wit. The world around them continued to change, and not always for the better. More white settlers came west. The government pushed harder for native peoples to move to reservations. Connor used every skill and connection he had to advocate for his adopted people, traveling to meet with government officials, writing letters, speaking to anyone who would listen. It was often discouraging work, but Mika was always there to support him, to remind him that even small victories mattered. They grew old together, Connor's dark hair turning gray and then white, lines forming around his eyes. Mika aged gracefully, her hair streaked with silver, her face weathered but still beautiful. They sat together in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play, and marveled at the life they had built. You remember that night? Mika asked one evening, many years after that fateful winter storm. They were sitting outside their tipi, enjoying the summer warmth, watching the sun set over the mountains. Which night? Connor teased, though he knew exactly what she meant. The night you found me by the boulder. The night you gave me your coat. I remember every detail, Connor said softly. How cold it was, how you looked so small and vulnerable, how I knew I could not leave you there, but I had no idea that helping you would change my entire life. Best decision you ever made. Mika asked with a smile, echoing the question she had asked on their wedding night. Best decision I ever made, Connor confirmed. That night I thought I was saving your life. I did not know you were saving mine. We saved each other, Mika said, reaching over to take his hand. After all these years, that simple touch still made Connor's heart skip. You gave me coat when I was freezing. I gave you home when you were lost. Fair trade, I think. Connor laughed and pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Very fair trade. Best trade in history. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family around them. Caleb was teaching his oldest son to string a bow. Maya was grinding herbs with her daughters. Samuel was telling a story to a group of rapt children. Rose was sitting with the current chief, discussing tribal matters with the seriousness of someone preparing to take on leadership responsibilities. We did good, Mika said softly. Our children are strong and kind. They know who they are, both Arapaho and white, and they are proud of both. They will help guide our people through whatever comes next. We did very good, Connor agreed. They are the best of both of us, the best of both our peoples. I hope they can help build bridges, help people see that we are more alike than different. Maybe they will, Mika said. Or maybe they will just live good lives and raise their own children to be kind and strong. Either way, it is enough. Connor kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still tinged with wood smoke and something sweet and indefinable, even after all these years. You are enough. This life is enough. Everything we have built together is more than I ever dreamed possible. Mika turned her face up to his, her eyes soft with love. I love you, Connor Owens. Thank you for giving me your coat that night. Thank you for giving me your life every day since. I love you, Mika Owens. Thank you for accepting that coat. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this incredible life. They kissed, gentle and sweet, a kiss full of history and love and promise. Around them, their family continued with their activities. The camp continued its rhythms. Life continued its eternal dance of change and continuity. That night, as they lay together in their tipi, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been so many nights before, Connor reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a drifter with no home to a man surrounded by family and purpose. From a stranger to these people to one of them in every way that mattered. From a man half frozen in a Colorado mountain, past to a man warmed by love and belonging. It had all started with a choice. A choice to stop when he saw someone in need. A choice to give his coat to a shivering woman when he needed that warmth himself. A simple act of kindness that had rippled out into a lifetime of love and family and purpose. Connor fell asleep with Mika in his arms, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together, grateful for that cold winter night so many years ago when he made the best decision of his life. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. Connor and Mika watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. Their family tree expanded and flourished, each new generation carrying forward the blended heritage that Connor and Mika had worked so hard to honor. There were hard times too. The pressure on native peoples continued to increase, and Connor worked tirelessly to advocate for fair treatment, sometimes succeeding, often failing, but never giving up. Mika stood beside him through it all, her steady presence and wise counsel helping him navigate the complex political and social waters. When Connor was in his 70s, he fell ill with pneumonia one harsh winter. For several terrifying weeks, Mika and their children thought they might lose him. But Connor was stubborn, and with the care of the tribal healers and the love of his family, he pulled through, though he never quite regained his full strength. After that scare, Connor and Mika spent even more time together, knowing their years were precious and finite. They took walks when Connor was strong enough, often to the cave where they had sheltered that first night. They sat by the river where they had courted under watchful eyes. They visited the boulder where Connor had first found Mika, now almost a sacred place to their family. I should have died here, Mika said one day as they stood by the boulder. She was 80 now, still beautiful to Connor's eyes, though she moved more slowly and her hair was completely silver. If you had not come along, if you had not stopped, I would have frozen to death right here. But I did come along, Connor said, holding her hand tightly in his. And you did not die. Instead, you lived and we built this beautiful life together. That is what matters. No regrets, Mika asked, looking up at him with those dark eyes that still made his heart skip. Not a single one, Connor said firmly. Every choice I made that night and every day since led me to this moment, standing here with you, surrounded by the love of our family. How could I regret any of that? Mika smiled, that beautiful smile that had first captivated him so many years ago. Good. I have no regrets either, only gratitude. They walked slowly back to the camp, leaning on each other for support, their steps measured but sure. The tribe had moved several times over the years, forced onto different lands, but they had stayed together, maintaining their community and traditions despite the pressures of the changing world. One evening, as summer was turning to fall, and the air carried the first hints of the coming cold, Connor and Mika sat with all their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around a large fire. Someone had asked Connor to tell the story of how he and Mika met, and though they had all heard it many times before, they gathered close to hear it again. Connor looked around at the faces in the firelight, seeing traces of himself and Mika in all of them. Blue eyes and brown, light skin and dark. A beautiful blending of heritages that represented hope for a better future. It was February of 1881, Connor began, his voice still strong despite his age. And I was riding through a mountain pass in the worst storm I had ever seen. I was cold and tired, and all I wanted was to get home to Cripple Creek. But then I saw something by the side of the trail, a shadow that turned out to be a woman, your grandmother, nearly frozen to death. He looked at Mika, and she smiled at him, her eyes shining with love and memory. I did not think twice. I gave her my coat, even though I needed it too. Because sometimes that is what love is, giving what you need to someone who needs it more. The children listened raptly as Connor told the familiar story about the cave and the fire, about the choice at sunrise, about the month of learning and growing and falling in love. He told them about their wedding day, about the birth of their children, about all the years of joy and struggle that had followed. Your grandmother and I come from different worlds, Connor said, looking around at all the faces. We speak different languages, follow different traditions, worship in different ways, but none of that mattered compared to the love we found together. Love bridges all divides, heals all wounds, makes all things possible. He reached over and took Mika's hand, holding it tightly. I gave your grandmother my coat that cold night so many years ago, but really she gave me so much more. She gave me a home, a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was. She gave me all of you. Connor's voice grew thick with emotion. So remember this story. Remember that your existence is proof that love is stronger than hate, that understanding is stronger than fear, that compassion is stronger than prejudice. You carry the best of both worlds in you, and you have the chance to build bridges, to heal wounds, to make the world better. He looked directly at his oldest grandson, Caleb's son, who was preparing to take on leadership responsibilities in the tribe. Use your heritage as strength, not burden. Be proud of all you are. And never forget that the simple act of kindness, of stopping to help someone who needs it, can change everything. The fire crackled and sent sparks up into the night sky as the family sat together, bound by love and story and the legacy of that cold winter night so long ago. Connor and Mika lived to see their great-great-grandchildren, though as they approached their 80s, they knew their time was drawing short. They faced the prospect of death without fear, having lived full and meaningful lives, having left a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. On a clear spring morning, when the valley was painted with wildflowers and the air was sweet with growth and promise, Connor woke to find Mika watching him with a soft smile. "Good morning, my love," she said in Arapaho, the language that had become as natural to him as English over the years. "Good morning, beautiful," he responded, reaching over to touch her face gently. "I had a dream last night," Mika said. "I dreamed we were young again, sitting in that cave after you gave me your coat, and you were telling me that you wanted to find out if what we felt could become love. And—" Connor prompted, remembering that conversation as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. "And I woke up knowing the answer," Mika said, her eyes shining. "It became love, the deepest, truest, most wonderful love. We found out, Connor, we found out together." Connor felt tears prick his eyes. Yes, we did. And I am so grateful for every single day, every moment, every breath we have shared. They lay together in the morning light, holding each other close, feeling the decades of love that bound them together. Outside, they could hear the camp waking up, the sounds of their family beginning the day. No regrets, Mika whispered, echoing the question she had asked so many times over the years. Not a single one, Connor replied, the answer he always gave. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. Everything else was just details. Mika laughed softly. I love you, Connor Owens. Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for the coat. Thank you for choosing me. I love you, Mika Owens. Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for choosing me back. Thank you for this incredible life. They kissed, slow and gentle. A kiss full of a lifetime of love and devotion and gratitude. When they pulled apart, Mika rested her head on Connor's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and Connor wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as he had done countless times before. They fell back asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the love they had built together. And when their grandchildren came to check on them later that morning, they found them still holding each other, peaceful smiles on both their faces, having passed from this life to the next together, as they had done everything else. The tribe mourned them deeply, but there was celebration too. Celebration of two lives well lived, of a love that had defied odds and bridged worlds, of a legacy that would continue through generations of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried both their blood and their values. At their funeral ceremony, Caleb stood before the gathered people and told the story one more time, the story of a cowboy who gave his coat to a shivering native woman, of a choice made at sunrise, of a love that changed everything. They taught us that love is a choice made every day, Caleb said, his voice strong despite his grief. They chose each other that first morning, and they continued choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. They taught us to see beyond surfaces to the humanity underneath. They taught us that bridges can be built, that understanding is possible, that love conquers all. He looked around at the assembled people, both Arapaho and the few whites who had known and respected Connor. Their story is our story now. It lives in us, in our mixed heritage, in our ability to walk in both worlds. We honor them by living as they lived, with open hearts and willingness to choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, compassion over indifference. The people murmured agreement, and someone began a traditional Arapaho morning song. The voices rose together, carrying across the valley, honoring two lives that had been lived with purpose and love and meaning. Years later, when Caleb's great-grandson asked him about his famous grandparents, Caleb took him to the boulder where Connor had first found Mika. The boulder had become a landmark, a place of significance for the family and the tribe. This is where it all started, Caleb said, running his hand over the smooth stone. This is where my grandfather made the choice that changed everything. He saw someone who needed help, and he did not hesitate. He gave away his warmth when he needed it himself. And from that one act of kindness grew a love story that has shaped all our lives. The great-grandson looked at the boulder with new reverence. What happened to the coat? The one he gave her, Caleb smiled. My grandmother kept it all her life. She said it was the most precious thing she owned because it represented the moment her life changed. When she died, she was wrapped in it. She and my grandfather are both buried wearing pieces of it, bound together in death as they were in life. He put his hand on his great-grandson's shoulder. Remember this story. Remember that you come from people who chose love over fear, who built bridges instead of walls, who saw humanity in each other when the world told them to see only differences. That is your inheritance. That is your legacy. Use it well. The great-grandson nodded solemnly, understanding that he carried forward something precious, something worth preserving and passing down to his own children someday. And so the story of Connor and Mika lived on, told and retold through generations, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness, to the strength of love that bridges all divides, to the beauty of two people who found each other in the cold and darkness and built a life full of warmth and light. The coat was gone, worn to pieces by time and use and love. But what it represented: compassion, sacrifice, love, hope lived on in every descendant who carried Connor and Mika's blood, in every person who heard their story and was inspired to choose kindness over indifference, understanding over prejudice, love over fear. In the end, Connor had been right. That cold February night in 1881, when he saw a shivering woman by a boulder and chose to give her his coat, was the best decision he ever made. It was the moment his life truly began, the moment he found his purpose, his home, his love, his everything. And Mika had been right too. Sometimes the spirits, or God, or fate, or whatever force governs the universe, brings people together at exactly the right moment for exactly the right reasons. Sometimes a single act of compassion can change not just two lives but generations of lives to follow. Their love story became legend, passed down through the years, a reminder that in the darkest, coldest moments, a single spark of kindness can light a fire that warms the world, that a stranger can become family, that different worlds can merge into something new and beautiful. That love, real and true and deep, can overcome any obstacle and bridge any divide. Connor gave Mika his coat on a freezing night in the Colorado mountains, and she gave him a home, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. It was a fair trade, perhaps the fairest trade ever made, an exchange of kindness and love that rippled out through time, touching countless lives and changing the world in small but significant ways. And somewhere in the spirit world or heaven or whatever lies beyond this life, Connor and Mika walk together still, hand in hand, warm and whole and endlessly in love, their story complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal.